Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. We've been going through Enoch, and then occasionally we get off on other subjects. So tonight we're finishing up the 70 shepherds part, and just see here what we've done on this section with this study. We started off with the prophecies, the introduction to it, the one that Jude quotes, which is chapter 1, verse 7, I believe. And then there's an end time outline, chapters 1 to 5. Then there's the fallen angel history that we did from chapter 6 to 16. And then we talked a little bit about the calendar, chapters 72 to 82. And then I had talked about his calendar a little bit with Josh Peck and others previously, so I added that in this playlist. So that's in there now too. And then we looked at the first dream, and then we started with the second dream, which is the shepherd's prophecy, chapters 85 to 90. And as you can see at the bottom there, we started this in January of 2024. So it's June now. So it's taken us 6 months to get through here. So let's go ahead and finish it tonight. So with the shepherd's prophecy, if you remember, you can just go back and look at the last two videos in this playlist. But Enoch has the second dream, and it starts off being symbolic of all the animals. And if you remember, there was a bull and then a heifer, and then there were two bulls. Some were black and red and different colors. And we figured out basically he's talking about in symbolic form Adam and Eve and Seth, and you get down to Enoch, and then the Nephilim history, the angels that fell, Shemyaza and Azazel, and the history behind it. And then it gets up to the flood and Noah, and then we have Shem down to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then we have the king list going from Judah down to David and to Solomon. And that's where we stopped really at that first part. We get down to David and Solomon. And then when the kingdom split, we start with a kind of a secondary prophecy, and it's called the 70 shepherds. And the idea that there would be 70 shepherds, leaders, kings, prime ministers, whatever you want to call them, people ruling over that particular place. And so the last two, we've started off from there, and we went through, and we'll review it just real quickly. We got up to 1948, and that's where we want to take off for today. So let's go ahead and do that. So, okay. So here's the part about the 70 shepherds. And we won't read all this, but basically we have the fact that there's supposed to be 70. So the first set is a set of 35, exactly half. And we're looking for 35. So when David rules and then Solomon rules and then the kingdom breaks up, we're wanting to follow Judah, the true king lineage. So we start with Rehoboam, which is Solomon's son. That's number one there. And then all the way down to Zedekiah. In Zedekiah's day, Nebuchadnezzar comes, destroys the temple, takes them all captive, and the nation of Israel ceases to exist. And of course, they come back 70 years later, kind of continue. But the interesting thing about it is that they have 70 shepherds, and they have gaps of time. And these gaps of time are when they're being ruled by a foreign power. They may or may not have a king, and even if they do have a king, he's not sovereign. He has to do what he's told or he's deposed. So we get down to Zedekiah, number 20. And this we covered this a couple of weeks back. And then we get down to the 12 hours, which are the times that the kings are set out to pasture. You know, like if you've got a workhorse and he's getting too old or for whatever reason he needs to not work, you send him out to pasture. Usually that means, you know, he ends up dying later, but retirement, that kind of thing. And maybe he comes back and maybe he doesn't, but he's not ruling or working or doing anything when he's out to pasture. And so in this case, these shepherds were pastured. They don't pasture, but they were pastured kind of for 12 hours. So 12 separate time periods. And we got to remember, number one, that this is originally a Hebrew document, and then it was translated into Ge'ez, which is a Ethiopian language, and then translated into English, or from Ge'ez to Aramaic to English. So Anyway, there's multiple languages involved. So when they translate this hours, we're talking about periods of time. And I don't think it matters a whole lot. I would love to see the Hebrew on this to see what word they actually used, because that might be really interesting as far as the calendar and stuff like that. But so there's going to be these 12 powers that interrupt the self-governance of Israel for a time. And it's not an hour, a day, a month, a year, or any particular time. It's just a season. We use the same thing in English. It's the day when I finally get the promotion. It's my season. My ship has finally come in. There's all these idioms we use to mean now, from now until something bad happens, everything's going to be great. Or it's something that I have to go through, and one day this will end, this horrible time period, but it's the day of my torment or whatever. So these are 12 hours, 12 periods of time. And it talks about them coming back, rebuilding the temple, and then these things happen. So we looked at it and we saw that if you look at it specifically, they're self-governing until Nebuchadnezzar comes in and destroys everything. So Nebuchadnezzar is the king of the Babylonian Empire. He rules for 70 years, and then Cyrus comes in with the Persians, to make it simple, and he takes care of them. So the Persian Empire is ruling. We're actually counting empires, not people, because Nebuchadnezzar, when he was ruling, it was Nebuchadnezzar, then it was Evil Mitradek, and then it was Belshazzar. Okay, and then Cyrus, if we look at it, was his son Pseudosemrus, I believe it is, Darius, someone else, and then another Darius, until it falls to the Greeks. So then the Grecian Empire comes in, and that's Alexander the Great. He rules it for a few short years, dies, and then the kingdom is split into 4 different kingdoms. And remember, Greece proper, which is Macedonia, and then Turkey are 2 of those. And they have nothing to do with Israel, so they're out of the picture. So when it splits into 4 countries, we actually are only looking at the 2 countries in the Middle East. One is in Syria, it's called the Seleucid Empire, and one is in Egypt called the Ptolemaic Empire. And that's what we have here. So it's Syria and it's Egypt, but it's being run by Greece or Greek-speaking people, that kind of a thing. So anyway, when we're counting these, we see the Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar starting, but then the Persian Empire starting with Cyrus, the Grecian Empire starting with Alexander the Great, but then it breaks up. And then the first time, and understand this, Israel is in the middle between Syria and Egypt. So when Egypt expands, they take over Israel. And then if Syria expands and pushes Egypt back, Israel would then be owned by Syria. So Israel goes from being owned by Egypt to Syria to Egypt to Syria, but each one of these are separate Gentile powers, separate kings, of course, but separate powers. So first is Babylonian, then Persian, then Grecian, and then under Ptolemy the First, he takes over Israel. And you can get all of this from Daniel chapter 11, starting with number 4 and going on down. And then a couple of generations later, a generation or 2, Antiochus II of the Seleucid Empire, Syria to the north, attacks, takes over, and Israel goes from being owned by Babylon, by Persia, by Greece, by Egypt to Syria. And then a generation or 2 later, Ptolemy III takes over the entire area. So now Israel is owned by Ptolemy III, or the Egyptian Empire. And then it goes back to the Syrian Empire, Seleucid Empire, Seleucus III, and then Egypt, Ptolemy IV, and then Syrian one again, Antiochus III, and then the Egyptian one again, Ptolemy V, and then the Seleucid Empire takes over everything, and that's when you hear Antiochus Epiphanes. And remember what happens at this point is Antiochus Epiphanes is driven out by or occupied by other wars. And there's the Maccabean revolt, which he probably could have crushed pretty easy, but there were other things going on. And by the time he got around where he could crush him, Antiochus Epiphanes died. And the new guy takes over and basically says, you can be independent, you can have whatever systems you want. You just have to follow directions, But this is still the Seleucid Empire, even though it goes from Antiochus Epiphanes to the next guy to the next guy. And they're kind of controlled by that Seleucid Empire until 63 BC, when Rome comes in. Now, during the time of the Maccabean rule, they're self-governing again. So that was the deal. So the thing is, we have 35 people, 35 kings in this first half of the 70 shepherds, and we've only got up to, back up here, number 20. And after number 20, we have these 12 Gentile gaps. So we're missing the other ones. So after 11 gaps, Israel becomes autonomous again, and we have the Maccabean rule up to the time of the Romans. So that starts with Judah Maccabee and goes through John Simon and all the way down to Agrippa II, at which time the country is dissolved, obliterated. Rome is there occupying it, but it ceases to exist as a nation. So that gets us from 21 down to 34. We're still missing a Gentile power and a king, another king. So when this ends, there's no nation. The Gentile power that occupies the area is the Roman Empire. And they occupy the area until about 132 AD. Simon Bar Kokhba actually manages to create a small city-state of only Jews. And because, again, of other problems, Rome could have squished it easily, but other problems were going on in the area. So 3 years goes by, 3.5 years, and then Rome finally fixes its other problems, comes in, and destroys the Maccabees. We remember not too long ago, a couple of years back, or a few years back, they found the Cave of Horrors. And basically what it is in that cave they found some skeletons of soldiers, of some kids, and some coins. Those are about the only things that would still exist from the time period of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, so about 130-ish AD. And so you can tell that by the pottery and the coins and things like that. So reminder of how those things go when you fight against what God has designed. So that gives us the 12 Gentile powers, which are those 12 hours. And that gets us up to 34 with Rome ruling. And then for a brief period, you have, not Antiochus Epiphanes, but Simon Bar Kokhba is number 35. So that finishes out these 35 of the 70 shepherds with the 12 Gentile powers. It's an amazing, amazing prophecy. So if you were going to say this so far is fake, you're going to have to say it's been altered at the very least sometime after 135 AD. So I'm not sure how you could do that. I mean, I suppose maybe you could argue that the current version that's in the Ethiopic canon wasn't added to it until the 2nd century AD. Maybe. I'm not sure how you'd go proving or disproving that. But anyway, it gets better from here, though. So let's go on. So we stopped here with this part, and this is the information about the Simon Bar Kokhba. And what I want you to see from this before we actually get started tonight is, says, I watched until this manner, until the 35 shepherds pastured the sheep. Each one completed their period and then, perished. So this is the 35. And of course, Rome is the 12th gap. Simon Bar Kokhba is number 35. So at this point, this is done. Rome destroys Israel. So the next 35, or the last 35, have to be sometime when Israel comes back. So that starts in 1948. So I want you to understand that. So the second half of this prophecy is specifically for our time period. So, and there's a lot of it that hasn't happened yet. And again, we can look at this and speculate on how it's going to go, but we have to kind of wait and see, as it is with most prophecies. Now, this part is about the Roman dispersion after Simon Bar Kokhba, But in this whole thing, I wanted to point out a couple of things. The birds of heaven come and destroy all the sheep, completely obliterating everything. And he doesn't even know if they'll ever come back. They are so desolated, and it was for 1800 years. But it's the beings, the Gentile powers that come that are pictured as different kinds of animals, are the eagles, the vultures, the kites, and the ravens. And they're all led by the eagles. And of course, the eagle is Rome, and it was Rome at that time. So we got to remember later on in this prophecy, if we see eagles again, it's Rome doing something, which after 1948 would have to be some sort of revived Roman Empire. Very, very interesting for us. So it devours the sheep to the point that nothing was left but all the bones. And he watched until they were all devoured. There was no flesh, sinew, which would be like ligaments, things like that on them. Only their bones stood. Their bones fell to the earth, and the sheep became very few in number. So when you put this in mind, I thought this was interesting. This is almost identical to Ezekiel 37, if you think about the Valley of Dry Bones. And we talked about that a couple of times in some of the other Dead Sea Scrolls. It talks about there's two separate versions of Ezekiel chapter 37. One where they come back knowing the Messiah, and another one when they come back and the Spirit is not in them. They don't know who the Messiah is. And according to the records, if we believe the scrolls, when they came back under Ezra and Nehemiah, they knew about the Messiah, they accepted him, were Trinitarian, basically, all that stuff. 1948, Jews come back under Pharisee Orthodox guidance. They don't know about a Holy Spirit. They don't think the Messiah came, so they're clueless on spiritual things in that sense. So that tells us, number one, in the Bible, Ezekiel chapter 37, it could be referring to either or 537 BC or 1948, but according to the way it's written, it has to be talking about specifically 1948 and only 1948. So when we look at that and we start looking at other stuff, it really begins to narrow the field of prophecy, and you'll begin to see other things. There's a few things in chapter 37 that haven't been fulfilled yet, one or two at least. There's two or three other points that have been recently. So it'd be a good study with that in mind to go forward to 37, 36 and 37 actually. And then 38 and 39 are the Gog-Magog war. And then you'll begin to see a few clues that are usually left out of that war. And then, of course, the rest of Ezekiel is all about the Millennial Temple and the Millennium. So with that, I just wanted to throw that in here too. So we've got a reference to Ezekiel 37. And then knowing that Rome comes in here. Rome is the eagles, vultures, the kites, and the ravens. Whoever's with them, it's like they're proxies or however that works. But Rome specifically. Okay, so now let's go on down here and look at modern Israel. So we had 70 total. Let me just do this to make sure I'm not blinking or anything. I'm going to pull up my calculator. So here we have a calculator, and we have 70 shepherds, right here, 70. So we've just got through the 35, so we subtract 35 of them. Okay, that leaves 35. So now there's going to be 23 shepherds. You see it right here? So if we subtract 23, that leaves 12. So this prophecy is showing us that there's 35, and that's done now, up to 1948. Then there's going to be a set of 23. Then there's going to be a set of 12. And I could be wrong, but the way I'm reading this is the 23 are between the time of 1948 and the beginning of the tribulation period. And then in the tribulation period, it talks about a very evil king, and there's 12 rulers of Israel that die. That would be the 12 shepherds, at the end of which there's going to be a millennial reign. It's very clear on that. So we got to look at these 23 shepherds and know that they have something to do with our time period. So let's look on this. This is, let's look at this very carefully. I watched the next 23 shepherds pastured, but when they completed their periods, they had pastured 58 times. Okay. And I had a note there that the gospel age will be closed when this is complete. So far we've had kings. Those have been the ruling sheep or the rams or whatever. A king rules as long as a king rules, and he dies or maybe retires if he gets injured, but not, and gives it over to his firstborn or whomever becomes the next king, and then goes on. You never see, it's possible a king could, leave and come back, but if he came back, the current king would have to allow him to come back, which might happen if it's a father and son or whatever, but I've never known that to happen. I'm sure it has somewhere. But in this case, it happens a lot. So that doesn't normally happen with kings because of that form of government. But a elected form of government, like presidents that can only rule for a time, they could rule, and then somebody else might win the election, so they're out. So like in the United States, we could rule, a president rules for 4 years. And he could do that twice in his lifetime, only 2 terms. So for instance, Trump, as an example, not saying anything good or bad about him, but he won an election. He served for 4 years. He ran again because he could. He didn't win the election. Okay, someone else took it over. So now he's out. But he hasn't ruled twice, so he can turn around and run again. And if he's elected, he would end up serving 2 terms. At the end of those 2 terms, he may want to run again and be fit to do so, but it's illegal. We can only have, a president can only serve 2 sets of 4 years in this country. This is Israel, though. This is a different deal. But the same thing is this. So if you have 23 shepherds, it's not 23, however long that is, periods of rule. It actually ends up being 58. Well, the only way something like that could happen, or one way that could be, is that some of the 23 are reelected. And we're going to see that in a little bit. So 23 separate men over a period of time are elected not once in their lifetime, not 23 times, but 58 times. So it could be a couple of different ways. So here's my theory on how that could happen. I just told you one, but it has to be interpreted one of 3 ways as far as I can tell. And this is my guess after reading this everything and trying to put it together. There could be 23 prime ministers of Israel who occupy 58 different terms of office. So some of them rule twice. Maybe 1 or 2 rule 3 times or 4 times. That kind of thing. Some being reelected. Currently there have been, and this is my copy of Enoch. This is the one we put out. It's a fresh English translation of Enoch, plus all this commentary. So it's available in paperback and Audible and Kindle. So anyway, one of our mini books. So currently at the time that this was written, and let me just back up to the bottom here to see when it was written. We wrote this in 2012, so 12 years ago. In the last 12 years, however many people have ruled, we don't know. It's not in this book, in other words. So it's from 2012. Okay, so let me back up here and get back to where we were. Okay, so here. So there could be 23 prime ministers in 58 terms of office, some being reelected. Currently we have, and as of 2012, we've had 13 prime ministers that have collectively served 21 terms of office. So you can see with the reelections, that's a fairly close ratio to 23 and 58. So the next possible way of looking at this prophecy is that there will be 23 prime ministers in 58 separate Israeli governments. Now you could count that by the types of Knesset, or just different governments, because they have to pull a coalition together and form a government each time something happens. So it could be something like that, probably something along those lines. Currently, there have been 13 prime ministers out of 32 Israeli governments. So there's been a little more governments than re-elected terms. There could also be 23 terms in 58 separate governments. So there's different ways of looking at this. Currently, there has been 21 out of 32. But when we look careful at this, it says we're still talking about shepherds. And up until this point, shepherds have always been kings, a person ruling, and that's his deal. So it's got to be, in my opinion, 23 separate shepherds that either rule or get reelected a total of 58 times, or the 23 shepherds that have 58 different forms of government, which could be either governments or Knessets or something like that. So we're not going to know for sure until it's over. But just the fact that we're told 23 out of 58, 23 separate people doing something in governments or whatever, but some sort of circles or patterns of 58 times. So let's look at this. So in here, let me just read some of this because I thought this was interesting. So are the notes on here on this page. After the Roman dispersion, which is 132 AD, 135, whatever, to 1948, the middle 23 shepherds begin to rule. So I think we've got that covered. And this is how we could figure it out. So the note here says that Menachem Begin, as an example, served 2 consecutive terms. That could be counted as 1 because he's not out and then reelected, or maybe it's 2. We have to look at it and see. Come to find out that that's not it because there's already been too many of those. Ariel Sharon, as another example, served 1 term plus a 100-day period of temporary incapacitation when the prime minister's authorities were delegated to the acting prime minister. So much like anything else, if there's a 4-year period for us and say a president dies of medical problems or whatever, gets a disease and dies, or is assassinated or whatever, or just resigns, whatever, then we don't immediately have elections, but the vice president at that point would be president, acting president, to the end. Now, say you had a president that did that and the vice president became president for 3 or 4 months or whatever, and then got elected. He could be elected twice, even though he served a few years in the other as acting president. So that's just the way our laws are. This might be different. Ehud Olmert served 1 term, and in addition served as acting prime minister, wherein the prime minister's authorities were delegated to him. So same kind of stuff. So lots of things to think about as far as the current government works on how to interpret these numbers. So let's look at this. So the most literal interpretation would be 23 prime ministers in 58 terms. So we start to look at that. So according to Wikipedia, as of 2012, there have been 13 ruling men in 21 terms of office, 32 governments in 64 years. And so right now we're at year number 76. The lists are given here, and then I'm telling you to add as we go by. So here's an example. So here's the terms, and here are the people. So first we have David Ben-Gurion. Now David Ben-Gurion, this is interesting too, because first off, they just declare themselves a state. And they don't have time to have elections because they're immediately attacked and they go to war. So David Ben-Gurion just assumes the role. Nobody elected him. He just assumes the role, and he's acting prime minister. There really has never been a prime minister yet. So the war is over. Once the war is over, they establish the government, figure out what they're going to do, how the voting works and everything. And then they have their first elections, of which David Ben-Gurion is elected as prime minister. So he's acting in the beginning, and then he takes over and does the actual one. It doesn't matter if we're counting people, right? So David Ben-Gurion is the first one. He's obviously the first shepherd in that set of 35, or 23 rather. and the first term. Now the next guy is Moshe Sharet, and he was the second, which would be the second. But then David Ben Gurion gets reelected. So he's number 3, the third term, but no shepherd value because he's already been here. See about the re-election part. So then there's Levi Eshkol, Alon, Golda Meir, Yitzhak Rabin, Menachem Begin serves 2 terms, 8 and 9, but he'd be number 7, the shepherd-wise, Yitzhak Shamir, Shimon Peres, and then that gets up to 9. But then Yitzhak Shamir serves another term, so does Rabin, and then so does Perez. So these 3 they serve again, so they wouldn't be counted. Then this guy, you're probably familiar with him, Benjamin Netanyahu, number 10, and it's actually term number 15. So then we have, you probably remember these, Ehud Barak, Ariel Sharon, Ehud Olmert, and then Benjamin Netanyahu gets reelected. So in terms, this goes all the way up to 21, and we're still he's actually the 10th guy, but we're after 13. So he's reelected. There's no new person. And then in 22, number 22 is Naftali Bennett. I can't talk today. Anyways, number 14. And then Lapid, if we remember him, 15. And then after that government came and went, we have Benjamin Netanyahu again. And he's currently still the prime minister. Benjamin Netanyahu is interesting because he has ruled back here. So the one set, and then a second set, and then a third set. Very, very interesting. So we're still at shepherds as far as individual people, number 15 out of the 23. And as far as counting terms, we're up to 24 out of possibly 58. So that seems a little lopsided. So it may not be terms. But when we go down here, here's Israeli governments. And the red ones are ones I put in this morning because we got to number 32 when this book was written, so 12 years ago. And it started in 2009 and it was written in 12, so just been a few years into it. But then 13, 15, 20, 21, and 22 is this last government under Netanyahu. And then, of course, the war started in October. The Hamas-Israeli war started in October of 23, and this is now 24. And Netanyahu's still president. Terms are still president. Although I heard today that Gantz resigned, or something's going on over there, and there's a possibility of calling for new elections. Somebody's trying to interfere in politics, probably. But this is that one. Now, at this point, let me flip over and give you a different chart with some of these same numbers on them. So currently, I said back here that this information is taken from Wikipedia as of 2012. So let's go to Wikipedia. I don't think they could be too wrong in listing like the presidents of the United States and getting the numbers right. So that's really all we're looking for. So here is that again. Actually, let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. That's much better. Okay, anyway, there was a provisional government from 48 to 49. They fought a war, then they had to get organized, so there's no elections. Finally, in 49, they start elections, get everything going. And so David Ben Gurion was ruling at that time, but he hadn't never really been elected. So they're calling that 0. That's fair. The very first government was by David Ben Gurion. And I guess they changed the government several times. So his first government, second, third, and fourth. And that gets him from 49 to 53. Basically, it's David Ben Gurion, all these. That's David there. Fantastic guy, fulfilled several prophecies in the Bible. Okay, and then the Charlotte government from 54 to 55. So Moshe, see if we got a picture of him here. There we go. So, yeah, that party. And then after him, we get David Ben-Gurion again. So his 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th governments, if you're counting government structures. And all this time, notice we've got Knesset. So again, during the provisional government, there really has been no elected prime minister. There has been no elected Knesset either, kind of like a parliament. So you wouldn't really count them. There really isn't anything until they get started. But so at this point, then we have had, when David Ben-Gurion ends, we've had 10 governments and 5 parliaments. So again, we could possibly be counting governments or parliaments. We were just talking about people, 23 separate people. My camera blinked for some reason. Hopefully everything's okay. Anyway, 23 separate people in 58 terms, cycles, governments, Knessets, something. So that's why these kind of numbers are important. So then we've got Levi Eshkol, his government 1, 2, and 3. Golda Meir, government 1, 2, 3. And then Yitzhak Rabin 1, 2, 3. And then Shamir 1, Perez 1, Shamir 2 and 3 and 4, Rabin 2, Perez 2, and then the first Netanyahu government. That's number 27 in Knesset number 14, led by Benjamin Netanyahu. So that part should be pretty straightforward. Sometimes it's him and other people, but the question would be who is the actual leader of the party, which is the person that has the most votes or the most members of their party, which is him. This time it was him anyway. And then the Barak government, Ariel Sharon, number 1 and 2, Olmert. And then Netanyahu came back into power. So he had his second and third times. Again, one person ruling multiple times. And in the first chart in the book, I'm just counting these as Netanyahu's ruling here for a while. He ruled back here for a while, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 different types of government. We're still talking about one person. But again, you could be counting like this is 1, this is 2, and at the end it's 3. Or again, we're not sure. So then he rules 2 and 3 and 4. And then there is a kind of a coalition, the Gantz, or the Netanyahu-Gantz government. Okay, and that is actually gets us up to 21. And then you get Netanyahu is ousted from power. And then or voted out, however you want to say it. I'm not making a political statement. I'm just saying, so Netanyahu's out and Bennett and Lapid are in. And so that was for a short time. And I don't know why they haven't updated this, because this gets to 21 to the present, because after that government collapsed, Netanyahu was voted back in. And then that's in 2024, I think. So it's number 36 as far as governments, and 24 as far as parliaments, or that, and then these people. So this is something to keep an eye on. So right now, after this, Netanyahu gets back in. Netanyahu is still prime minister, may be ousted in the near future, it's looking like. So we'll have to wait and see. If he does he come back a 5th time? We'll see. Anyway, but that gets us up to 2024 with the current war going on, Netanyahu back in power again, and these numbers. So again, as far as we're looking at governments, and I don't know how they do everything in their government, but according to this, different forms of government, different Knessets, and then prime ministers. So we get down here. So currently it's the 37th government and the 24th Knesset. So this is neat here. So the red ones means nobody has put this in. So this gives me the idea that somebody redid this website. This is Wikipedia, but it almost seems like somebody wiped it out and started over. All of these in red, you'll notice if I click on them, it says not yet started. And that doesn't mean the people, it means the page about them. So when they're blue, they're started. So there's something there about Netanyahu, and you can read about him. So if we go to the Lapid government, Bennett, and go down here, we should have okay, well, maybe not. They usually have governments in Israel. So 35th, 36th. There should be a 37th. Knesset website. That's not what I want. Okay, anyway, you could look up. Let me just try that real quick. We're in Wikipedia. Is there a search? Okay. So Israel government 37. I misspelled Israel. Shame on me. Oh, I just didn't capitalize it. Okay, that's good. 37th government. It was here a while ago. It really was. Yeah, Elizabeth Taylor. Okay, whatever. Israeli government's the 37th one. Now I don't want to create a page. Well, it was here once upon a time, earlier this morning. So we'll just go back to here. So basically, again, we're not sure how to do this, but it's at least 23 separate guys. I think that's the main thing to look for. And so if we go back to our Enoch, these are the guys that have been, not counting the re-elections or the separate forms of government in each guy's time. So like David Ben Gurion, I've got as one, but apparently there's a provisional and then 4 times that he ruled. Sharet is twice, and Ben Gurion another 4. So there's different ways of doing this. But as far as that goes, we're up to Benjamin Netanyahu term number 24. But as far as shepherds goes, he would be, we're still in number, there's been 15 separate people, and we're going toward 23. So we still got some time. So if Netanyahu does get ousted and then gets back in, at least we'd have another, or someone else gets back in, the number keeps going up. And then also notice, I think it's interesting how Netanyahu sometimes isn't there for just 1 year or 2 years. Sometimes he's there for 6 or 8 years or whatever. Some of these other guys probably did that also. So anyway, that's that part, right? So theoretically, when we get to the 23, go back up to the top here, the 23 shepherds in the 58 times, whatever that is, it's got to be one of those things we talked about. When we get to that, there's going to be a time of trial with 12 shepherds, which ends at the establishment of a kingdom. Okay. So we'll go ahead and look at some of these. We're going to look at the whole thing in detail, but so basically there's a section about a Messianic versus Orthodox and secular. That's what it looks like to me. The titles are just my guess of what we're talking about. So during this time of the 23, behold, lambs were born by the white sheep. So it's probably Messianic Jews, Orthodox Jews, because they come back not knowing. They begin to open their eyes and to see, and they cry to the sheep. The lambs cried to them, but the sheep would not listen. They were completely deaf and blinded to what they had told them. So there were new sheep that opened their eyes, become Messianic believers, try to talk to their rabbis, and they won't have anything to do with it. There's this Messianic versus Orthodox or secular type thing going on. So while that's going on, it says, I saw in the vision ravens. I'm assuming because of the way this is at that time period that it's Muslims, like the Muslim wars, the surrounding ones. Now this is interesting because remember back at the beginning when we first started with the Bar Kokhba thing, it said the eagles came in with the kites and the ravens and something else. There's four separate birds, but they were led by the eagles. Okay, so the eagles were Rome. So at this point, ravens, which unless something changed, which it could have, but if we stay consistent with the prophecy, these ravens, whoever they are under the control of Rome. Now again, we don't know what Rome is at this point because technically it should be a Roman Empire. So it may or may not be a Catholic Pope-controlled Roman Empire because they do have a lot of power, but it's still not an empire as far as an empire goes. That would be like the Holy Roman Empire in Britain or Germany, Russia. We've talked about that before. Constantinople with the Ottoman Empire. So we had 3 separate heads of Rome, according to the Ezra Apocalypse prophecy about the Roman Empire. And it seemed to all fizzle out officially in 1917 with a kind of an attempt at a comeback in 1945. And then we're seeing the beginnings of it rising up again. So anyway, we're told that kind of stuff happens. So these ravens flew upon those lambs and took one of the lambs, one person, apparently a lamb, dashed the sheep in pieces and devoured them. And I saw till horns grew upon these lambs, and ravens cast down their horns. So horns would be strength, maturity, able to fight. They turn into a ram, and that's not something you want to mess with. And so, but they still tear the horns down, the rulers somehow. So that seems like this 76-year period so far, nothing but problems from the ethnic group, people, and nations around them, certain ones. So, but I don't know who this one specific lamb is that they took. So that would be interesting to see. Okay, so anyway, then I saw, or it says, and I saw a great horn sprouted up on one of those sheep, and their eyes were opened. Probably means they become Messianic or believers. And they looked at them, their eyes opened, and cried to the sheep, and the rams saw it, and all ran to it. So possibly a conversion. Messianic Judaism becomes the norm rather than the other way around, or something like that. I could be off, but that's what it sounds like. And then the persecution comes because they're growing too rapidly. So notwithstanding all this, those eagles, vultures, ravens, and kites, same thing we had back in the first century, the coalitions of Rome attacked and destroyed Israel. The old pagan Roman Empire, 100 to 200 BC AD. So same stuff again. So Rome, in some form, some sort of revised Roman Empire at this point, and if I'm reading this, I'm assuming it sounds like it's before the 12, but towards the end of the 23. So this is something like before the tribulation becomes. So if Russia is connected with the empire, we know that Russia comes down with the Magog invasion sometime. So that could be what we're talking about here, with the eagles, the vultures, the kites, and the ravens coming. They still were tearing at the sheep, swooping down and devouring them. Still the sheep remained silent. Some of them are just, sheep. We say that a lot in the United States. People that don't stand up for their rights and they don't know what they're doing, they're just sheep. Kind of makes you wonder where we got that from. Instead of saying they're cowards or they're complacent or they're whatever, they're sheep. Be interesting if it started a long time ago with this particular prophecy or this kind of an idea. Don't know, but so still the sheep remained silent, but the rams lamented and cried out. Those that know better. Those ravens fought and battled with it and sought to lay down its horns, destroy it, but they had no power over it. So there's a very strong messianic leader, whether he's good or bad or some sort of a leader, that they can't seem to overcome. Now, if the current Hamas-Israeli war is the start of the fulfillment of Obadiah, I would assume this would be Netanyahu we're talking about. However, even if it's successful, if 5 or 10 years from now, if we're still here, some Israeli prime minister or somebody decides, they've learned their lesson, so let's just give them their land back. Then, of course, it's going to start all over again. So that's what I mean. We don't know for sure. That's happened twice as far as Lebanon goes. There's been 2 occupations of Lebanon. Somebody's decided to give them back. There's been 1 or 2 occupations of Gaza Strip. Last time it was 2005 when Ariel Sharon gave the Gaza Strip their independence. But anyway, something to do with a revived Roman Empire. I thought that was interesting. And I saw that man, and again, I don't know what man we're talking about because it just popped from being a ram to a man. So that could be Messiah or the anti-Messiah or something. That man who had, that's Michael, who had written down the names of the shepherds, brought them to the Lord of the sheep. He helped the ram and showed him everything. His help, judgment was coming down. So Michael then went and helped this one lamb. He appeared to somebody. That's interesting. Okay, so God's wrath, the last 3.5 years. So this could be, yeah, I've got that as the remnant fleeing to Petra. I skipped over something here. Okay, so the last 12 shepherds and the eagles and the vultures and the kites and the ravens came to break the ram. So this is in the last 3.5 years, or the fleeing part. So this is in the tribulation period, if I'm reading this right. The Lord of the sheep came to them in anger. Everyone who saw him fled and fell on his shadow before his face. The eagles, the vultures, the ravens, and the kites assembled together with all the desert sheep. I thought that's interesting because the desert nations are also called the dragon nations in some of the prophecies, and they're talking about the southern nations around the area of Israel. So desert, like Saudi Arabia, desert, that area, Edom, Moab. So they all came together and assisted one another in order to break the horn of the ram. So I saw that man who wrote the book according to the command of the Lord until he opened the book of destruction, and the destruction of those 12 last shepherds had done, and showed that they had destroyed much more than their predecessors. So this is interesting to me. Everybody talks about how Ezekiel 38 has 7 years where they burn the weapons. And it used to be everybody figured that must be the 7-year tribulation period. And recently, I think Bill Salas and a few others have come up with the idea that Israel, if Israel's at peace and is using the weapons to burn for 7 years, the believing ones flee in the middle. So maybe this war starts 3.5 years before the tribulation period. And it's a possibility. But they bank on that there's no way they could be burning the weapons if they have fled out of Israel. And number one, they could take the weapons with them and use them for fuel. Number two, not all of Israel leaves. Some of the Israelis are non-believers, and the government sides with the Antichrist. That's how he gets into the temple, the government, at least, and the people that are there that are not taking sides, might take the mark or whatever, are probably still using these weapons. So, again, that doesn't really tell us one thing or another, but it's some interesting theories. Okay, so the Lord of the sheep came to them and took his staff of his wrath in his hand and smote the earth. Thought it was interesting. The sheep and the goats, he's taking his staff and he's making a judgment now. Thought that was kind of interesting. Reminds me of Matthew 25, the judgment of the sheep and the goats. The earth was torn apart, and all heaven fell away from the sheep and were swallowed up in the earth, and it covered them. So that definitely sounds like Armageddon. A great sword was given to the sheep, and the sheep proceeded against the beasts of the field to kill them, and all the beasts and the birds of heaven fled from before their face. So the evil people are wiped out. And then we won't read this, but basically this is the millennial reign. The throne is erected, the tabernacle is built, and then we have the judgment of Azazel, some other things going on, the judgment of the stars, the judgment of the 70 shepherds, and then the millennial temple being built. And then this is another one, the sheep and a goat judgment type thing in here. And then that ends that chapter. So backing up then, it really does look like the last 12 shepherds are in the tribulation period. So again, we've got 35, which takes us from Rehoboam, Solomon's son, to the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Then there's this big gap. And then the second 35, which are divided in 23 and 12. So the next set, which is 23, starts in 1948, ends at the beginning of the tribulation period. Then there are 12 prime ministers in Israel. Apparently, there's lots of assassinations inside of 7 years, 12 people. But then that, whatever happens, happens, and then we have the establishment of a kingdom. So this deserves more study, especially as time goes on. But I just want to finish our study on this with this. So we've gotten, as far as Israeli governments, there's 37. right now with Netanyahu. If he gets deposed and someone else is put in, that'll be number 38. And I don't know if we're counting governments or not, but we're counting something. So we've got the amount of people. This is for sure correct. So you've got 23 people that rule in a set of either 58 terms or 58 governments, governments being government coalitions or Knessets or something. But either way, we're in the area of getting close to 40 out of 58. So we're well past half. And over here, we're well past half. But we're nowhere close to the end. I mean, if we had in 1 year assassination after assassination, we would still have to get, well, if it's not Netanyahu, well, even if it was, if other people, then he wouldn't come back, of course. So if there was other people, there'd have to be at least 3 or 4. Well, there'd have to be at least 4 more, right? 28? Am I getting my numbers mixed up? 23 shepherds, different people. So again, like most prophecies, it's hard to pull it all together and know for sure, but this is a good outline. This helps us understand. And don't get this confused with the 7 shepherds war of Micah chapter 5. This is the 70 shepherds prophecy of Enoch chapter 90. So, and then there's other shepherd prophecies, but they don't all come together. So at this point, let me stop for tonight. And we'll go to the chat room and see if we have any questions. And it looks like we have a good number. Okay, looks like Karen became a member. Thank you very much. I appreciate all you guys that that support us through Give, Send, Go and PayPal, and then here on this that get to go in the chat room and ask questions. We just got back from a conference, it was pretty neat to see a lot of old friends and a lot of new friends. So we'll be going to a Prophecy Watchers conference, and that's one I didn't bring up. We're going to a Prophecy Watchers conference in 2.5 weeks, I think, end of June, and that'll be in Colorado Springs. So, but anyway, thank you very much. Next question is, in Daniel 2:43, it speaks of they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. Is this Nephilim activity? It's been a thought. Basically, this is talking about the 10 kings, and they don't get along for whatever reason. They're not strong. They're not united. And so that could be simple extreme democracy. And 5 of the kings want to do one thing and 5 want to do something else, and they can't come to an agreement. Well, that's definitely what's going on. But the part there about they mingle their seed, King James says they mingle their seed with the seed of men. And if you took that just point blank, the seed of men would be human, and the seed of them is them, whoever them are. So it sounds like it could be Nephilim stuff. And either at that point, I mean, it could be a Nephilim like we think, a genetically altered person, because those things do tend to come back. We recently discovered a prophecy in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in another document that some of them reference. So we're still digging and finding things. We'll get to studying them eventually. But if we're interpreting them right, it sounds like that kind of stuff begins to happen again. But anyway, whether it does or not, these people are demonically possessed, so to speak. So if a demon is the spirit of a Nephilim, and the demon is able to control a person and do what it wants to through them, or totally possess them, or whatever, we basically have Nephilim back. So if I was able to be possessed and then totally blank out, and for years, this other being does what it wants with me, and I'm just not even here, that would be like a total possession. And at that point, I would be the physical me, but I would be a Nephilim walking around. I'd be demonically possessed. So it could be other things like that. And they're talked about as iron mixed with clay, and they don't adhere one to the other, just like iron doesn't mix with clay. You can't take clay and iron and put them together and bake them and hit them with a rock and have them not come apart. They just don't pull together. Very well could be Nephilim activity, though. Super sticker, $50. Again, thank you very much for the donations. It's fantastic. Okay. Gifted 5 memberships. Thank you very much. So all you guys that got the gift membership are able to say things in the chat room. Another person gifted 10 memberships. Thank you again. It's fantastic. I wonder if the 12 hours could have significance to the 12th Onah. Ooh, smart girl. I had not thought of that. Yeah, what she's talking about, one of the other texts in the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about, in the Psalms at least, when they talk about this psalm is to this tune on this musical instrument, maybe written by David because of something. Sometimes it'll give you all that data in the title. And the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about, well, you look very careful at if it's a stringed musical instrument, whatever music it is, how many strings does it have? You know, like if it said guitar, we would all know a guitar. Most guitars are 6-string. So if we had something else that was a 5-string or an 8-string or whatever, if it said that, the number of strings talk about the number of time, the number of the 500-year periods. So anything in the 12th Onah would be in the 500, this last 500-year period, which ends in 2075. That was one of the significance in Amos chapter 6. It talks about Israel being attacked because they weren't paying attention, attacked by Gath of the Philistines, which today we call the Gaza Strip. And it has a seat of power in it. Seat of power is a government structure. So the government of Gaza Strip, or Gath of the Philistines, is called properly violence. And the Hebrew word for violence is Hamas. And so if you transliterate that directly, you're being told sometime in the 12th Onah, because it talks about later, King James it says viol, but it's a nevel. A nevel is a 12-string musical instrument, Hebrew. So if you pull those together, if it still applies to anything outside of the Psalms, then we're told sometime between 1948 and 2075, Gaza will be independent. They will have a government called Hamas. And at a certain point, they attack. And it talks about the rest of the war and what happens in several places. But very interesting to have a name and be told. Because, you could say just because they're called Israel or Hamas or whatever, maybe this was a war that happened 2,000 or 3,000 years ago when Israel was there. You don't know. Maybe it's both. But when you have something like this, it's like, no, it's sometime after 1948. And technically, it could be several hundred years before, but Israel wasn't there yet. They're at war with Israel. So it has to be sometime after 1948 when Israel was back and the end of the age. So the 12 hours, that is interesting. So the 12 hours would end with, the 12 hours would end in the last 3 Jubilees, but it's still in the 12th Onah. That is very, very interesting. I don't know if it's directly connected or not, but it is correct. I mean, when Rome was finished with all that, they were dispersed. They come back. When they start back up, it's in the 12th Onah. So very, very interesting. I'm glad you guys are here. This is fun. Also gave a super sticker, $20. Thank you very, very much. Every little bit helps, and it helps us support the ministry and to grow. And there are some really interesting scrolls we want to look at in the near future. We just finished, I'll go ahead and pull this up here just to let you know. This is our website. Yeah, and that's me again. Okay, so if you go to our bookstore, we just finished this one, and this is what I talked about at the last conference. And so anyway, it's called Ancient Prophecies from the Dead Sea Scrolls. As far as prophecy goes, they talked about they get their prophecy, their understanding from the patriarchs. So we found this in this book here, we found all the patriarchal writings from the Dead Sea Scrolls and other places. Tried to pull them together. They're highly fragmented, but we got some very good, interesting information. So that, and this one is the new book, and it's all the fragments that have nothing to do with the testaments per se, but just later on their commentaries on Daniel and Obadiah and stuff like that, and what did they say about whatever, just what their belief system is on prophecy. So we put that together. So now that we've got these two done, that's the bulk of, not all, but most of the prophetic things from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so we'll be able to continue on from there. Is there any credence to the Psalms of Ascent and the Psalms of Asaph lining up with the tribulation? I have not looked at it, but that's a possibility. The Psalms of Ascent and the Psalms of Asaph, yeah, that would be something to look at. One of the problems that kind of stopped me a little bit is that if you go just grab a Bible and you open it up, one psalm will have the title of, again, this song to this tune with this musical instrument, and sometimes it'll tell you it was when David or Solomon or Asaph did whatever. But sometimes we don't have the title. And I've been told that in other Bibles there are complete titles. So that's interesting. We get a few from Gad. Gad has, I think, 144 and 145 or something like that. There's two of them in Gad that actually have titles. They're identical to what we have. We don't have the titles. So the idea was, if it's a prophetic psalm, it's extremely important we have the title to figure out the time period. So Psalms of Asaph for sure would be important if they have a title and anything with a stringed instrument. Psalms of Ascent should be also if we have the titles. So, and again, I don't know that they were saying every single psalm, but the idea is if the psalm is prophetic and if there's a stringed musical instrument in the title would tell you the time period of when the prophecy takes place. That's just their teaching. And I don't know of anyone that would prove that there are exceptions to the rule or not, but that's where we want to go with it, just to see if there is any kind of connections like that. I haven't looked at it, but I think I would like to. That would be pretty cool. Eventually, one of the things we didn't do, I didn't finish, is there's a selection of Psalms. I went through and looked at them. The Psalms are identical to what we have, but then there are the extra Psalms of David and some of the songs of David. And we have a few of those. I've glanced over them. They don't look like they're prophetic in any way, shape, or form, but they need to be studied more. So we will do that eventually. Do you think it's possible the final 12 leaders are the 12 leaders of a revived 12 tribes of Israel that are re-raised after sacrifices begin, or 12 assassinated in the 7 years? Yeah, it's possible. We'd have to look at that very careful. And then also always remember, this is the English of the Ethiopic of the Hebrew. And sometimes just a small word change will give you a different idea. So that's pretty interesting too. I don't know, but there's 12 leaders. That would make more sense, actually, if you think about it. Because I was looking at the second part, so there'd be, just like it's always been through this, 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, up to 12. And 12 leaders in 7 years, that'd be pretty hard to do. There'd have to be a lot of assassinations. However, if in the second half is what we're talking about, maybe not the whole, but a leader for each one of the tribes, that would be interesting. That very well could be. So keep that in mind, and we'll see well, we won't be here, but still, that's interesting. Yeah, because it just seems like, at first like you're thinking, well, it's probably in the 7 years, but it's got to go past it or before it, because that's a lot of people. But if they all rule at the same time, it's a definite possibility. Okay, Bob gifted 1 membership. Thank you very much. Again, everybody really appreciates that. Can the out of 58 governments include post-1945 48, 23 plus pre-1948, 35. That's 58 governments when the 23rd is implemented. I don't think so. Again, it would depend on the exact language of the Hebrew, so maybe that would be something to think about. It looks like it's saying there's 35 rather, 35, and then the big gap, number 12, which ends in the 12th Onah. And then we have the others starting up. So it doesn't seem like that would go before 1948. Somebody did tell me that possibly during those Middle Ages, even though there was no nation of Israel in Israel, there was a couple of places that tried to start a Hebrew Jewish nation elsewhere. And if so, maybe that would be. But even if that's the case, you're talking about 500 to 1,000 years, a small empire that gets squished because they're not around anymore, and then 500 to 1,000 years, and then everything starting. But it is worth looking into. I think I know where you're going with that. It's like it'd be nicer if it was closer to the end. So, and also remember, since the rapture, all we know is that the rapture happens before the beginning of the tribulation period. That doesn't mean we have to wait all the way to the end. Theoretically, all the way to the end would be the start of the tribulation period, and then 7 years, the second coming. But that doesn't mean the rapture has to be right there. Could be. But, so as far as us going home, we still don't know. And hopefully it'll be soon. 56 prime ministers, with 9 serving over 10 years. How, since Israel came back in 48, less than 80 years. $56. Not sure they're part of that, but yeah, I don't know. It's I don't know that they ever did serve over 10 years. I might have said that and misspoke. The only thing I know for sure is these lists. So we've had, those are the ones we've had up to Benjamin Netanyahu today, which is 24. And some of them only serve a year or two, and others serve multiple years. Netanyahu, on the other hand, has served 2 or 3 times here, 2 or 3 times here, and then it was back here. So he's served many governments. Now, governments can come and go whenever the government collapses. So sometimes the governments, and I think we see that in the list. So like here's the governments. Sometimes the government's only like 1 year, or maybe that's even less than a year. This one was only in, that probably disappeared in a matter of months, that particular government. So, and then we go on down. So, see, now here's one. This Netanyahu government was 15 to 20, 2015 to 2020. So if we look at him ruling this time, it's from 2009 to 2020. That's 11 years. So right there. So anyway, but we've had 36 governments to the present, and at least 24 Knessets, and then other members we have back here. Yeah, so we couldn't have, 9 or 10 of them each serving 10 years. That'd be 100 years. So, and it's been 76 years so far. But that's a good point. Again, all we can do is look those up. And I don't trust Wikipedia too well, but for something like a list of presidents of the United States, the current one is number, 45, 46, 40. I mean, they wouldn't say it's 79, so they should have those right. Super chat, $5. Please lift my nephew Kevin up in prayer. Has a family and needs a job. Okay, let's pray for him real quick. Father, we just ask that you bless Kevin and help him to get the job that he needs and to take care of all the needs of his family. And we just ask this, and if anyone in the family is not trusting you or is confused or whatever the case may be, we ask that you use this situation to direct all of them toward you, make the relationship with you be very, very clear in all of their hearts. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for sharing that. Can you expound on Philippians 3, 10, and 11? Being conformed to his death, that if by any means I may attain to the resurrection of the dead. Also, could you explain that they might obtain a better resurrection? Okay. Yeah, because I'm sure he understands the whole concept of resurrection. There's two kinds of resurrection: the resurrection to eternal life and the resurrection to damnation. And so a lot of people get confused and think, well, if people resurrected with Jesus, that'd be the first, next one would be the second, next one would be the third. So we're actually talking about two different kinds. And so in those passages. In this one, that they might obtain a better resurrection, it sounds funny, but my guess would be that he's simply saying resurrection to eternal life rather than eternal death. The first part there, though, being comforted to his death, if by means I may attain to the resurrection of the dead. It's probably the same thing about attaining to resurrection to eternal life. It is kind of an odd phrase, and maybe I'm just not understanding it completely, because it does seem kind of strange to say it that way. Paul knows he's saved. He's going to be there to attain to the resurrection, unless he's talking about hurrying up and attaining it. But he probably knows it's one time, it's set, so there's no hurrying it up. So not exactly sure. There could be a lot of ramifications to that. So according to this list of Israeli governments, we have a ways to go to even get to the rapture. Not necessarily. The rapture is a different set. The rapture is a different set of prophecies. There's a lot of prophecies that are specifically for the church, and others that are specifically for Israel. That would count all of them, all believers. But the rapture may be a ways off, but it may not be. Some people have thought that there might be a gap between the rapture and the start of the tribulation period. I'm not sold on that idea. So my idea would be it would be closer to that. But again, if we're talking, no matter how we do the governments, we're talking about the number of people, and I think we only need 5 or 6 more actual prime ministers. And again, if Netanyahu is ousted and we get another one, and then as you've seen there, sometimes in less than a year, they can get dissatisfied, have new elections, stuff like that. So 5 or 6 people could easily be 3 or 4 years. So if there's a gap of any time, the rapture could still be very, very close, or it could be further away. The one thing that I would guess, again, it's still my guess, but I would say it probably can't be past any of those numbers. And this is similar because in this series, when we go back, there's a prophecy about between Enoch's time, there's going to be 70 generations, and then the Messiah would be born. And when you look at Luke shows exactly 70 generations from Enoch's child Methuselah to Jesus. You can just go through and count them. And so there's no way for us to set a date by that, because you don't know if he has his firstborn son when he's 15 or when he's 50. You just know it's approximately so far away. So when anytime we get anything with generational counts or government counts, this is almost like a generation, like a dynasty ruling, so to speak, except it goes in cycles. So good questions, but yeah, we shouldn't worry about the rapture being a long ways off, or even worry that it's like tomorrow, because the Lord's got that set. Nicole became a member, level angel. Thank you very much. Glad you're here. Allison says, could the day after the war with Israel and Hamas ends look like Zephaniah chapter 2? Rubble and pasture lands. Israel can't go into the Hamas Gaza and can't remain and rebuild. That's possible, yeah. Zephaniah 2 has got some interesting, well, Zephaniah anyway, has got some interesting prophecies to it. And I think some of the stuff in Obadiah does go along with Zephaniah. And I couldn't tell you the exact chapter or anything at the moment, but a lot of the minor prophets I think we really need to focus on. So many times in church they read them and think, yeah, Israel bad. Stop doing that. We should learn from that. Don't be bad. And then we go on, because we don't really know what else to say. There's not enough details because somebody attacked somebody, killed a bunch of people, and then God got mad and fixed the problem. So without any more details, it's like, but then you look at some of the language and you begin to think, okay, what if this is, later? So according to the scrolls, all of those things are talking about before the establishment of the kingdom. So it's got something to do with our time period. Maybe not all of it, but something in each one. So yeah, I would definitely put Zephaniah 2 along with it. Lewis gifted 1 membership level angel. Thank you again very much. Question. Pastor Billy Crone says that the USSR has tanks that can be burned, and I always believe that the Jews in Petra were burning the weapons for fuel. Why would Israel be burning a thing they have power plants? Yeah, unless the power plants are wiped out in some way. I often thought, and that could be true, and I don't know if he means like the tanks are made of some sort of specially compressed wood that makes them stronger than steel. I've heard rumors about that, but I've never actually seen anything. Of course, I probably wouldn't because I'm not in the military. But another thing would be, though, whatever mechanism, instead of running on gasoline or petroleum type substance, maybe it is a nuclear reactor in the tank. And so if that's the case and it's not damaged, you could remove the nuclear reactor and maybe it would go for 5 or 10 years and do something like that. So that's what I'd always thought of, the power sources from these things. But again, I'm not really sure. I've heard things like that, but not sure. Kendra says, prayers for Chazz, please. He wrote on the chat that his kidney function is at 5%. Ooh. And they don't know why, and they're unable to stop it from falling. He's lost most of his nerves and muscles. Ooh, okay. Let's pray for him real quick. Lord, again, we lift up Chazz to the kidney function and anything else that may be causing the kidney function. Just ask that you heal him for this. And again, he and his family would see the healing and become closer to you. We just ask for salvation in the whole family. And we thank you and we pray in Jesus' name. Okay, and next one, super sticker for thank you very much for the donation. Really appreciate it. Again, I do appreciate all you guys doing that. And let me flip over here. And okay, last question. Something clicked. There we go. I must have clicked it twice. Last question says, is it true in the New Jerusalem, the translated saints, as we are seated in heavenly places and joint heirs with Christ, our abode is there, yet we have access to both heaven and earth to rule and reign? I would assume so. There's nothing that really says yes or no, but I don't see how we could really rule and reign if we're in the New Jerusalem and we never come out. So I don't know for sure. That's one of those things that we'll have to figure out. But that does make sense to me that would be that way. So, okay, we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. We'll come back next week and continue our studies in prophecy and scrolls and things like that. And this has been an interesting study, I think, that we need to keep in mind these prophecies like from Enoch. So we'll get back in touch next week. And I wish you guys a blessed weekend. God bless.